Hey, welcome back to Garbro's Field Desk. I have for you Chapter 9 of Book 4. Like, subscribe, comment down below, join the Discord. Chapter 9, A Human Legend. Over the din of the escalating rifle fire, all humans who heard the shrill beep of the timer all stopped, their eyes wide and their blood running cold as it carried through the air. There was only one person who would dare bring such a thing to a battlefield, and the fact such a person was on the other side of the darkness made them all feel a deep, soul-crushing sense of fear. A voice called out from the darkness, causing every human to whip their heads behind cover. Hey-o! Dusty had just wrenched his head below the berm of the trench when he heard 30 shots crack out from the darkness, the sounds nearly blurring together like a GAU Gatling gun. He heard multiple stumbling feet and turned his dirt and blood-stained eyes, watching in horror as 30 auxiliaries, all of whom had no idea what was out there in the darkness of the night, fall, tumble, or ragdoll to the ground.
It's McKnight!
Dusty howled out, running over and checking on the fallen auxiliaries.
Curtis, it's fucking McKnight!
Dusty checked their necks, but found no pulses. The rounds were all kill shots, either shattering the heart, skull, or spines of their targets.
My God.
Dusty, where is he? Curtis screamed as the battle kept raging around them, squeezing off buckshot shells into the darkness with his Rhodesian Auto 5. I can't see him!
He's in the mid-forest!
Dusty called out, M9 in hand and his 8-point M81 cap sitting tilted on his head.
He's only firing when he has a target for all of his rounds!
Dusty scrambled over to a radio, the brim-touched operator busily trying to both comfort and stop the bleeding on a halfling's severed artery, the blood pouring out of a wound to his armpit. While she had his head pressed to her chest to keep him from looking and coaxing the squirting wound to heal with a magical balm, Dusty jumped over them, colliding with the radio.
Shit! No, don't use that tube!
Alphonse growled out, kicking the mortar tube over.
There's a bullet hole in it, look!
The crewman for the mortar tube leaned in, and there on the surface of the tube a hole was punched through, right through the metal.
Go, help the others man their tubes.
Alphonse said, ducking down slightly as another tracer zinged overhead. He looked around at the unfolding battle and sighed at the chaos of it. The line was being hit so hard that they had nearly buckled twice, and it was only now that the teams clearing the fallen trees were able to start their flanking maneuvers, pushing against the assault as best as they could. The other lines were doing their best to press in as well and come together like the teeth of a bear trap, but it was difficult with hostile humans leading the counter-pushes on the flanks. The town itself was faring okay as the weakened and exhausted warcasters were rotated in and out of the front line, keeping the barriers to the homes steady. First Sergeant Erinda Caine and a few others of her kind had to run around and sprint across the snow in order to catch and deflect entire artillery rounds. They used some kind of odd magic to change its course and send it hurtling towards the merchants on the other side of the town, though they appeared to mostly be mortars now. Alphonse thought it odd that Erinda Caine didn't seem to worry about the merchants, but didn't pay it much mind since the heavy artillery had stopped a little while ago.
Mortar Lord, there's a call from Dusty.
The radio operator said, leaning back from his little ad hoc radio station in the center of the mortar dugouts.
Mortar Lord.
Alphonse thought to himself with a mental snort, still annoyed the locals seemed adamant to give him a title.
Hand me the horn.
As soon as the radio receiver was handed off, the voice of Dusty was already filling Alphonse's ear.
In the fucking woods! It's fucking McKnight! He just dropped like 30 dudes with kill shots!
Dusty bellowed, the sound of a nearby explosive spell clapping through both the receiver and reaching Alphonse's ears at different times.
You gotta start dropping mortars! McKulick. Jerry McKulick. Are you high right now?
Alphonse said in a state of humored shock, turning around towards the front line as it flashed and pulsed in the short distance.
He's an older guy. There's no way he's on the battlefield. Just launch the fucking mortars!
Dusty bellowed into the receiver before it was cut off by a sharp crack that split the air along the front lines. Alphonse looked down at the receiver, biting his lip as he kept mental count of the rounds he had left to throw, then turned to Huff, who was laying against a stack of crates, nursing multiple gunshot wounds that were slowly healing along his chest.
What do you think?
I think stranger things have happened. After all, that man can shoot faster than most full auto weapons.
Huff muttered, leaning back with a pained grunt as his body spat out two malformed hunks of lead and copper jacket, pushed out by the healing wounds.
Any word on Yule?
Alphonse consulted his map and scribbled fire orders on a pad of paper, handing it off to a nearby Goliath auxiliary.
Fire on these coordinates. Range them back and forth between these grids.
He looked over to Huff.
And I don't know. As far as I'm aware, he's still fighting with the Fae there, on the left flank.
Huff sighed out, closing his eyes.
I hope he holds. If those Fae get through, we're all toast.
They had been sloppy. While the artillery was firing, they had been walking up on this weakened flank, and he had been none the wiser. When the artillery suddenly stopped and troopers were able to lift their heads again, they found the melee specialists had been only 30 yards from the line. When the call went out for reinforcement, Yule dragged both himself, Domino, the Gnolls, and any other melee fighters he could summon in just a few minutes. Now they all crawled over this crater-ridden trench section like ants, howling and battering themselves against each other with blade, bayonet, helmet, and fist. Yule threw the battered form of a dead Fae to the ground, marring his pretty officer's uniform with the corpse mud on the ground. He had been overeager, charging over the trench with his southern elf troopers only to come face to face with Yule in the glow of flames within the darkness. He may have been Fae, but he was no match for the frustrated right hand of Crinja and leader of Cosmoline Company. Domino was still dueling behind him with another human wearing a torque, having killed two others in one-on-one battle. He was still using his massive camp knife he had brought over from the other side, the feathers of Severus trailing along his strikes from where she had tied them to his blade. They were all nearly to their ankles in slush, mud, and blood as they fought in this little gap. Yule had been tearing his way through Southern Elves, Orcs, and the peons of Alberdan with a large battle axe quickly offered by the dwarves who fought around him. Dwarves hacked, stabbed, shot, and cut at their taller foes in a ragged rank, keeping a formation out of habit as they held the line. Brim-touched, Valley Elves, Adorned, Gnolls, Himalaya Harpies, and Oni whirled around where a line did not suffice. When the enemy artillery had stopped, the Southern Elves and Fae had to quickly pull their teleportation magics out of their pockets. But it was rushed, underpowered, and immediately rebuked by the more than ready warcasters of First Cab. The press-ganged races forced into battle by the Alberdan Valley Elves were the first to arrive, but the magic had been so rushed that they appeared missing limbs, if not their entire heads or chunks of their bodies. They also arrived half-crazed, which threw the entire battle line in chaos. It was the timely arrival of Ramella, Bruta, and Acklamen that gave Yule a moment to breathe, as they had brought more fighters with them, little ragtag groups of Adorned and Centaur. The three Fae waded in to fight beside the humans for perhaps the millionth time in their lives. And for one, not even the first time against Fae. Acklaman himself wore a fanged grin that nearly brushed against madness, his starlight bright eyes glowing with resolute bloodlust as he charged across the line, a great, heavily used falchion borne on the shoulder with both of his hands.
Welcome back, brothers!
Acclaman exclaimed, the two other enemy Dracanic Fae snapping their heads around as they cleared the berm with their own contingents of orcs and southern elves. He collided bodily with them, his beaten steel armor flashing into view, and his blade cleaving the head cleanly off the slower Dracanic. Bruda went running through next, holding a war sax with one hand and a small round shield in the other. Her hair still glimmered like the light of dusk, but her face was far more angry than Acclaman's, far more incensed by rage. Swatting Yule on the ass as she ran by, Ramella brought up the rear, her plaid scarf fluttering in the wind as she threw a javelin, punching through the chest of a torqued human. She then speared an orc in the stomach with her head, a Germanic war knife snapping into her hand with the crisp crack of the sound barrier breaking. Yule wanted to linger back with his troopers, but the egging force of Crinja propelled him forward, and with an inward eye roll he bellowed out a challenge, throwing down the war axe and pulling out his gore blade, the flecks of his old Fey victim still shimmering in the light of the explosions. The blade caught the flickering lights within the night, and everyone who knew the blade and why it would be drawn snapped their eyes to it. Their commander was taking off the kitty gloves and striding forward towards their enemy. The gore blade, known to the troopers under Yule's command, was something akin to an enchanted weapon, imbuing itself with both the weirdness of humanity as well as the magical blood that had been cooked into the metal and stained into the handle. While it may have been just a boot knife at one point, it was getting thicker, larger, wider, as if growing in power with the Fae it dispatched. Yule's challenge was heard by the gnolls first, who all howled and came running down the ruined trench line, boiling behind Yule like a swarm as they quickly all chose targets, their plate carriers and running short stained with more blood than the fabric could ever hope to hold. The dwarves were the next to charge, screaming their challenges in Dwarf Ha as they flooded forward in a line of muscle and clan steel, all while threading around Yule and the gnolls to broaden their line and deepen the ranks. The Himalayas screeched as they joined, followed by the flashing weapons of the rest of the auxiliaries. Acclaman, Bruda, and Ramella may have met the charge from the enemy, but Yule crashed into them with the weight of his. They all roared collectively, shattering the night with their voices as spells cascaded around them, throwing hues of blue, green, and red onto their rushing forms. The Fey forces did not have time to form a line, and when Yule's men crashed into them, it was like a bucket of water being thrown against a pile of marbles. Enemy forces were scattered and isolated, and dozens of mini melee battles erupted around the front of the ruined trench. Machine gun and rifle fire still ripped around them, sometimes a gunner finding a lucky window and raking the melee fighters they recognized as not their own. The noise was deafening as warriors, soldiers, and leaders fought to the death in the darkness, their fighting forms being lit up by magical airbursts, mortar explosions, the fire from burning vehicles or trees, or from the fires burning the fortifications in the trench itself. Bodies blurred with the shadows as the melee grew to fever pitch. Oni bearing their studded kanabos broke the backs and bones of their enemies. Long claw gnolls plunged their dagger-like fighting claw into necks and groins, shedding through muscle and sinew as Himalaya harpies screeched and ripped out the necks of warriors too slow to avoid their maws. Dwarves hewed and cut. Brim-touched, adorned, and valley elves fought with blade and bayonet, while anyone else just tried to make sure they were stabbing the right person in the first place. The enemy was no slouch, taking blade and bullet to the Veil Riders as heavily as it was thrown upon them. Enemy Longclaw gnolls proved to be vicious opponents, felling auxiliaries and only being halted by other gnolls and the Himalayas. Southern Elf and Orc fighters paid blood for blood as they traded wounds and kills with their spears, short swords, war hammers, and fighting blades. Domino hauled his last torch human up into the air, roaring with defiance as he broke the man's back over his knee, the sound of the bone snapping nearly as loud as a gunshot. Yule had been wading through the fighting bodies, making his way towards a rather dapper-looking Fey in the uniform of an officer, the man wielding a bayoneted rifle like a war spear. His hair was so black that Yule thought for a moment that it was made out of pure darkness, but the shine from a fireball detonating solved that mystery. It rippled with the color, though dulled somehow. He was fine-boned and royal-looking, but Yule felt as confident as the glacial chill in his chest that he would be no obstacle. An extremely heavily armored orc went to get in Yule's way, but as he raised his warhammer, Savras came howling out of the sky, plunging both of her talons into the orc's neck and chest armor. To Yule's inward horror, her talons punched straight through the steel, the two tumbling out of view. Specialist, the gnoll that was currently leading the other Longclaws, came laughing through the lines as he engaged more targets, and it sounded odd, like a melodic bark. He wielded a stolen sword in his offhand and struck out with the claw of the other, taking Southern Elves to task with animalistic ferocity. As the two carved him a path, Yule shrugged through it. He ripped an orc off one of his fallen auxiliaries, sparing the young Brimtouch from the spear that was about to punch through her chest. Instead, Yule threw the orc backwards, and the crunch of an Oni Kanabo told him there were a few auxiliaries behind him keeping watch. The black-haired Fey looked nervous despite his wide grin, and Yule felt his chest tighten as the Fey cut down one of his gnolls. The female Longclaw cried out with the yelp of a kicked dog. Then the Fey finished her off with a deft stab under the chin. Something inside Yule reacted viscerally to the sound. He always liked dogs, and had gotten into more than one fight over owners mistreating their hounds in public. For some reason, this lit a more personal fire in his heart that glowered next to Cringe's fierce cold, and his knuckles groaned as his hand tightened around the humming boot knife in his hand.
Vitka!
One of the other female gnolls cried out, running out towards the already dead gnoll but coming to a skidding, growling halt when the Fey swung his bayonet around. The Fey grinned, the blood of Fakta still dripping down his chin from where the arterial spray had caught him.
You want some too, then? 2 more of you and I can make a coat.
Stand down, Yule said, his calm voice carrying over the din of battle as he walked up beside the female Longclaw, her nose wrinkled and eyes narrowed. She spun around, facing Yule with feral determination.
Can't take him!
He's mine, Yule muttered, stepping past her and brandishing the gore blade. The Fey officer recoiled from the sight of it like it had stung him, his face turning from smarmy to terrified within 2 heartbeats. Then he looked up into Yule's face, realization dawning on him. He took a step back, his eyes wide.
Mother.
Can't say I am, Yule said, then sprang forward after the Fey, swiping the bayonet away with a ring of steel from his gore blade. To Yule's astonishment, the Fey dropped the rifle and turned to flee, scrabbling over the body of an earlier victim.
Mother, it's him!
He screamed, stumbling as he started running towards the left flank.
He's here! Don't let him kill me, Mother!
What the fuck? Yule said in confusion, then ran after him, shouldering away a valley elf and southern elf that were dueling with their short swords. Are you fucking kidding me?
Warlord, you're right!
An Oni screamed out behind him, and the sounds of pounding feet loomed behind Yule. Yule turned his head in time to see a large male white Oni body check an orc, slugging her across her tusked chin with the end of his grudge breaker. The female Longclaw from before leapt upon an Alberdam Brimtouch that was trying to sneak around Yule, trying to gain an angle to stab the human in the side. The sounds of her fangs ripping into the shoulder of the man faded from earshot quickly as Yule caught up to the retreating Fey, snatching up the back of his long black hair and hauling him backwards.
Mother,
He screamed before being jerked back, the Fae crying out as Yule threw him bodily into a pile of steaming corpses, his nice uniform instantly sodden by the mud and blood. His eyes were wide as he spun around to look at Yule, the light from a burning bunker illuminating the flecks of gold and the gore blade and the gleam of hatred in Yule's eyes. The Fae managed to pull out a small dagger and lunge at Yule, but the attack was easily parried and the Fae caught a vicious backhand from Yule for his trouble.
Pyro!
A woman's voice called out amongst the din of the melee battle and weapon fire, followed by a grunt and a scream as she sliced through someone with her Fae warblade.
Pyro! Where are you?
The Fae woman broke through the whirlwind of bodies in time to see Yule catch another strike from her son, his large human hand holding him fast at the wrist. Her lilac-bright eyes stared on in shocked horror as Yule flipped around the gore blade and struck up into her son's ribcage, the steel drinking deep as it pierced straight through his heart. All the work to raise him from a mere loy porin like herself, securing him a place at the table of the Elir, gone.
No.
She breathed out, her glittering Fae warblade shaking in her hand.
No! Pyro!
Yule turned to look at her while pulling the blade from Pyro's shaking chest, tossing the body down as the Fae gasped and writhed with curled fingers. The gold-flecked blood of Pyro poured off of Yule's gore blade in a stream, and Yule rolled his shoulder.
That was my son!
She roared, gripping the war blade with both hands and eyes wide with outrage, hot, angry tears flowing down her dirty cheeks.
That was my boy!
Yule flicked his gore blade, speckling Pyro's dying face with his own blood. He locked eyes with the woman, setting his jaw and walking towards her as he spoke over the clamor around them. You should have left him at home if he was so precious. Yet in your arrogance, your inflated vanity, you brought him to this battlefield. You brought him right here to die. It was a tasteless thing to say. Yule knew that. But she had a much larger weapon than he, and he needed her to be a little mentally rattled for an advantage.
You son of a bitch!
She screeched and ran at Yule, her armored feet agile and unfaltering as she stepped and leapt over the bodies of the fallen.
I'll cut that hairy fucking head from your shoulders! I'll cut apart your body and hang it from the pillars of my home!
Yule tilted his head at her an inch, wondering where her helmet had gone. She was wearing a fancy suit of plate armor, obviously expensive. But where was her helmet? As she rushed to him, he stepped forward slowly, watching her arms and legs. She was a fighter, an actual warrior, and he knew this would be far more difficult. He could tell just by how she held her blade she knew a thing or two about using it, much unlike her son. Specialist Gnoll cackled nearby as he split another long claw Gnoll's face in two with the scavenge sword, kicking the Gnoll backwards into the muddy snow. 3 dwarves, 5 Oni, 6 brim-touched, and 2 valley elves formed up around the Gnoll, quickly joined by 6 other Longclaws. They formed a type of ring around Yule, making sure that no one got in his way. Yule guessed she was going to swipe for his head first, and he was correct. He ducked just in time, his muscles contracting with unnatural speed as the blade hissed over his head. It was an odd sensation that he was still coming to terms with, and he was not alone. At first he had thought it was Cringe's doing, but he had learned after questioning his fellow humans that a lot of them were finding odd things going on with their bodies. Everything from sharper sight to having a strength they normally didn't. He knew not to take it for granted and reckoned a follow-up swing was coming, and he was correct again as he saw her whirl her shoulders, the blade coming back and around in a clean transition. He stepped backwards this time, the blade humming just in front of his plate carrier and hitting the corner of a magazine with a chime of metal. He breathed in the stench of intestines, ozone, smoke, and sweat, exhaling as he ran his thumb down his nose. She wasn't breathing hard at all, and he could tell she was annoyed that he dodged 2 of her strikes. He couldn't tell if her confidence was damaged yet, so he charged forward with a burst of speed, going for her strong hand. He aimed the tip of his gore blade for the gap in the gauntlet, but the steel glanced away. She reacted quickly, trying to rapidly step backwards and bring her blade down, but Yule kept up his press, keeping them both locked together as he reached up and gripped his fingers on the top edge of her pauldron. She caught on quickly, slamming her sword pommel across Yule's face, but panic began to grip her heart as the human shrugged off the wound despite his now bleeding cheek and eye. This pain was nothing to what he had experienced before, one of Errol Royer's gifts to him, Yule supposed. He reached down, slipping both his hand and the gore blade under her tasset, and heaved while pulling on the pauldron. The Fey woman saw the dark sky, the fires, and the swarming bodies swirl in her vision as Yule threw her 10 feet through the air. She landed hard, rolling with the clamor of plate armor, and she knew her shoulder was broken as soon as she came up onto her feet. She howled out a guttural cry as she bared her teeth, fixing her eyes on Yule as he stalked towards her, his head low and shoulders hunched. She knew the humans who wore the commanding torques were strong, but why was he? How the hell could he just throw her like a child through the air like that? She was wearing a full suit of plate armor. How could he just toss her? She gave out a soft cry as she tried to heft her sword with her main hand, but the broken shoulder would not yield. She switched to her other hand, breathing in and out in a hiss through her teeth. Yule held the gore blade in a modified saber grip and slowly stepped towards her. "I always like fighting people like you," Yule said lowly as the woman tried to also keep her footing, even though her broken shoulder did its best to make her knees buckle. "You always fight with rules. You watch your footwork, remember all your forms. You forget other things." She narrowed her eyes at Yule, her chestnut hair sticking to her sweaty and now bloody face.
I'm sure it is amusing to a beast like yourself. All you know is how to use force and crush your way through problems. You lack tact and intelligence. Even now you're stalking towards me like a damned animal.
"You're a hard one," Yule said with an appreciative smile. "Hard to imagine that little sniveling shit came out of you."
He was always his father's child,
she said with an almost sad, angry smile, and took 3 quick, long steps towards Yule, bringing her blade up for a plunging strike. As soon as Yule lazily brought his boot up and kicked the mud into her eyes, she knew she was done. A dirty trick, to be sure, but Yule fought for survival, and survival meant winning at any cost. Something some people forgot over time while resting in comfort. Something that the Fey woman had forgot, since she had crossed the Veil after the Great Fey War. Her head jerked when the cold mud slapped across her eyes. She couldn't see him step to the right. She heard him do so, but she had jerked her head back involuntarily. She just couldn't help it. It had been thousands of years since she had last seen actual war. Maybe it had just been too long. As she heard the boots of Yule slosh on the ruined soil, she thought back to how she would have never jerked her head back like that during the war. A bad habit she had picked up on Earth, she supposed. Turning the head from the sands of beaches hitting her face, or snow from the mountains while she vacationed. She brought her point down and around, slashing through the air, but knew she missed when her blade came back down into her guard. If her helmet hadn't been torn off by that damned Longclaw, she would have been fine. The blade would have been unable to slip past her visor, or into her master forge gorget. The mud would have slapped against her helmet, and not against her eyes. But her head was exposed, her eyes covered in bloody mud and snow, and she didn't even have the honor of seeing the sabered combat knife glide past her shielded guard brace. The point dove into her flesh, through the side of her neck, and the pain made her gasp out in shock, her eyes opening in stinging regret as blood began to gush and pour down her broken shoulder. She collided bodily with Yule, her feet digging into the mud, trying to at least push or knock him over. But she didn't have the strength. Fury poured out of her along with her blood, and within seconds she sank down to her knees with a clatter of her armor. Oddly enough, she felt Yule guide her down, holding her and making sure she did not fall to the ground. She coughed, wheezing in a breath as Yule lay her down in the mud and snow, then blinked in confusion when Yule wiped the mud from her eyes with his thumb. She twisted her lips, trying to form the words, but only managed one with a wheezed breath.
Why?
It's only right, I think. Yule said lowly, then dragged over her warblade, setting it down next to her. I'll bury you with your stupid son. They won't defile your body. I'll make sure of it. She went to speak, but blood welled up in her throat, and she coughed, struggling to form the word. It's all right. Yule said softly, patting her on the chest plate. For some reason, this kill made him tired, even though she was fey. Tired somewhere inside of his soul. Won't be long now. Even as he said the words, her body began to fall still, her eyes staring past Yule up at the dark, moon-filled sky. Dark tendrils of smoke trailing past it like streaks of black and marble. He knew she was already dead, her brain surviving on the last trickles of blood still within it, and he stood, looking around. At least, she supposed with the last dregs of her waning thought, she got to die under the moon of her birthplace. The enemy was retreating.
Mortars!
Someone called out, and Yule turned, looking to the brim-touched who was pointing up at the sky. How in the... Yule began, but shrugged down when the first mortar came down, blowing a hole through a tangle of bodies. Yule stood, cutting a hand towards the battered and ruined trench line. Fall back to cover! The mortar fire was so danger close it bordered on lunacy, striking just in front of the main fight and attempting to push the Veil Riders back while their own troops tried to pull away. Those who could not pull away from their enemies still warred with each other amongst the falling mortars, and it only added to the madness. Fall back, I said! Yule bellowed, ripping a dwarf off of his wounded quarry and throwing him towards the lines. Retreat to cover! The mortars were small. Yule realized that now. The cracking detonations were demure, and he surmised that somewhere someone with a 60mm mortar was plunking rounds with direct line of sight. This would have been manageable if it wasn't for the M2 fire raining in around them along with magical detonations. When the ground near Yule exploded skywards with a dull, muffled thud of an explosion, he expected to catch shrapnel. Instead, hot air brushed against his face, and he assumed it was a detonation spell. All around Yule, the auxiliaries were scattering, pumping their legs and bucking it towards the ruined trench line. But even with their retreat in the incoming fire, not all the fighters had disengaged. In fact, some of the enemy were pushing forwards on their trench, weapons bristling and grenades swinging on belts. A figure emerged from the flashing dark, his bloodied plate carrier and silky shorts glittering with the reflected light of spells and tracers.
Nyah! No one passes specialist.
Specialist! Yule roared, ducking as a thrumming explosion spell sailed over his head, the barely restrained, glowing ember of power glowering from within the dark tendrils of smoke.
Specialist, no!
Specialist was outnumbered 10-1, but he was stalling for those behind him. Yule could see them. Medics were hauling wounded by the double fistful, and the only thing standing between the 20 or so medics was one person, the Gnoll, Specialist. Yule ducked and shrugged his way through the fleeing bodies and the dead, stumbling over a large dead Goliath still holding his sledgehammer. Specialist was holding his own, but the fight was not turning in his favor. The snarls, yelps, and guttural growls of Specialist in combat urged Yule on faster, his boots sliding and slipping on the blood-soaked mud. Yule got within 25 yards of the brawl when the air shimmered 30 feet to the left of Specialist, and he pumped his legs, already recognizing the fuse spell about to go off.
Specialist!
Yule screamed in alarm, and the Gnoll heard him this time, turning his head to look at Yule as he ducked a swing from the blade of a southern elf.
Look out!
The air ripped apart as the fuse spell detonated. The spellcaster's clap of the hands audible in the forest just before the spell went off. Broken bodies, weapons, and the ground itself was turned to shrapnel, the air whizzing with fragmentations and a great gout of flash-dried mud coating the area thickly. Yule's ears were ringing when he lifted his head, squinting out in pain as he got back up to his feet. M2 fire still impacted around him, as well as the other spells that flowed both directions overhead. Yule grimaced, pulling a chunk of someone's bone out of his shoulder and throwing it to the slush and mud, his face glowing red, orange, blue, and yellow as spells rumbled by.
Specialist!
Yule coughed out, forcing his legs to work as he stumbled and slogged his way towards where he last saw the Gnoll standing.
Specialist, can you hear me, bud?
Yule barely heard a low whine of pain over the ringing in his ears and took off at a wobbly jog, moving past the enemy wounded that still crawled along the ground. He saw plenty of his own troopers laying sprawled on the ground, but he had to get the fuck out of this dead zone. Out the corner of his eye, he saw shadows lurch from the ground in a sprint, dead heading towards the trench. Some dove into cover, or rolled over sandbags into a defilade. Others jerked and fell, falling into the slush and being lost in the darkness. A rippling line of machine gun fire kicked plumes of dark mud and bloody snow into the air, chasing after Yule, and he dove down to the ground, rolling across multiple bodies as he did. The round snapping by his shoulder failed to drown out the agonized whine of Specialist, and Yule twitched his head around, finding himself eye to eye with the Gnoll.
Hey, bud.
Yule said with a wheeze, reaching out and roughly slapping his hand to the Gnoll's shoulder, his muddy fingers leaving furrows in the wet fur. Specialist's eyes were wide, his chest heaving as he whined out a response.
Hello.
Yule gave him a quick once-over, and the Gnoll was in bad shape. Multiple fragments from a machine gun had embedded themselves into his flesh, leaving a ragged peak of metal from his shoulder, across the backplate of his carrier, and down into his hip. Worse was the fragment of someone else's bone in his upper chest, clearly causing a very slow but steady lung collapse.
Medics, okay.
Specialist whined again, trying to lift his head but failing due to the pain, instead letting it smack wetly into the mud and snow. Yule knew the medics were well away with their wounded, only avoiding the fuse spell due to Specialists making sure they were not harried by the enemy sappers.
Yeah, bud, they're okay. I gotta get you out of here, though.
Nah, Specialist hissed, giving Yule a weak shove with his least wounded arm.
You'll go.
Yule snorted.
The fuck you mean, nah? Specialist leg no work.
Specialist barked out with a sob, and Yule slowly looked down. The gnoll's legs were mangled, and Yule realized with a start that the machine gun currently adorning Specialist's chest had also hit him with its barrel, and the piece of thick steel had shattered the gnoll's legs. Yule went quiet, looking at those broken legs, and a distant voice echoed into his mind.
No.
Yule growled, getting up onto his knees and grabbing onto the back of Specialist's plate carrier, ignoring the fireballs, cracks of lightning, and zing of tracers scouring the air around him. Specialist gave out a bark of pain, reaching out with his hand to try and stop Yule.
Nah. Walla, nah.
Buckle up. Yule rumbled to Specialist, then cleaned the wounded gnoll into the air with ease, his muscles bulging as he whipped him up and over into a fireman's carry.
Nah.
Specialist cried out, his eyes welling with tears at both the pain of his body and the worry over Yule.
We die. We die if you do this.
Then we die together on this field. Yule hissed as he felt a rifle round skip through the bicep of his left arm, but he set his face as he started jogging. Yule focused on just moving his legs along the uneven ground, his boots slipping on the slush and bloodied mud, but soon his recovering ears heard the clamor of the trench.
It's Yule! He has a gnoll! Quickly! Covering fire!
Light up that tree line. They're trying to walk their rounds into him.
Yule ignored the voices. The trench was only 40 or so yards away, but it was at a slight incline, through slush, at night, and there was a wounded gnoll on his back. Yule squinted his eyes at the purple tracers now flying over his head towards the forest, and tried to shut out the sounds of rounds impacting the wet earth behind him, and a lot of them sounded close. Yule focused on just moving his legs. He ignored the sudden pain in his hip. He brushed off the odd sound his knee was making and tuned out that his right leg felt like it was leaking. He focused on the most simple of things. Left leg forward, then the right. Left leg forward, then the right. Yule didn't realize he had hit the trench until he fell into it, his knees buckling after stepping oddly onto a sandbag. Both Yule and Specialist tumbled into the trench, the two of them rolling down broken, loose sandbags and timber until they came to a stop in the arms of more medics than Yule had ever seen in his life. Specialist was crying out something in no cur, and Yule was having trouble staying awake, blinking in confusion at the faces around him.
11 modern wounds. They're all over his body.
A halfling medical private said in alarm, her face bright with sweat in the light of glittering fires. A satyr leaned over him, her hand already bleeding as she worked the healing magic.
How was he even able to walk? His hip is shattered.
Yule sighed out as he looked over and saw that Specialist was alive and being healed, then closed his eyes with a chuckle, confusing the medics as he spoke out.
Got him this time.
Line is real quiet now.
Hackholm said, patching what may have been a 30-second hole in her inn.
I wonder if that means it's all over now.
Uli smiled at her.
Over for now, but not for long. The assault failed. Both sides were mauled pretty heavily, but it appears our guests have won the day.
Inside of Hackholm's inn were most of the citizens of Limstory, as the inn was far enough away and on the other side of town. It was here that they sheltered, only hearing ricochets whiz over the roof or duck down when a stray round punched through the wooden walls.
How are you holding up, Harley?
Zarin asked, one of the few brave enough to stand by the window and drink tea. Pearlie ran her hand along her cheek, still able to feel the trail a stray bullet left when it zipped by her face.
I'm holding up.
Was a close call.
Zarin said in a cheeky, lackadaisical tone as she watched a wagon of wounded auxiliary troopers get carted to their field hospital.
Lucky you weren't sitting more to the right than you already were.
Hackholm chuffed out a laugh.
Lucky that my walls are made of whole timber. If you were in Cruin's Inn, there'd be a lot more holes.
As it is,
Uli said, setting down his own mug of tea.
It appears that while their number of wounded is substantial, they only suffered a couple hundred dead. Not to mention they managed to savage an entire... how did they say it? Artillery, battery. They took whatever that was out. Then I saw them ripping the collars off a dozen humans they managed to take alive. One fought back, and the massive one called Decimus beheaded him. Some of them died nearly as soon as the collars were removed, but a few appear to be surviving.
Beheaded him?
Pearlie said in horror.
But why? He was a prisoner. I thought the Vale Riders didn't kill prisoners.
Uli shrugged.
He tried to fight back, so they took care of him, I suppose. I was not at liberty to ask why.
Brutal ones, these humans.
Zarin said, then startled, pointing out towards the street.
Oh my, look, it's Yule! He's in one of the wagons of the wounded.
Everyone within the room clambered up to stand at a window, dozens of people jockeying to get a look.
They have 5 healers on him.
Hackholm said, setting her hands on her hips.
What did he do to become so wounded? Was he fighting on the front lines?
Uli watched the gnolls marching in step behind the wagon, their ears back in anger and looking to Yule worriedly.
Must have something to do with the gnolls. I've never seen Longclaws maintain cohesion like that.
The side door opened, no one noticing Chicks walk in, and the human let out a tired sigh as she set her rifle against a table, plopping down into one of the chairs.
So many wounded.
Pearlie said quietly, clasping her hands together in front of her respectively while watching the troopers either march or get carried past.
I've never known battles to have so many wounded. Usually there's armor and such. Maybe a scar or two if they're lucky, and don't get caught with magic spells.
Chicks reached out, taking a man's untouched ale.
That's because a lot of the time you just get a grazing wound from shrapnel, or get banged up due to explosions.
Everyone turned around and startled at the sight of the human. She had deep bags under her eyes, her main shooting eye sporting a painful-looking ring around it where she ate her rifle scope during a spell explosion. Her hair was filthy, caked in mud, and her uniform was a mess of black powder burns, blood, and the stains of battle.
My goodness!
Hackholm said in alarm, snapping her fingers at the kitchen staff who were at the other window.
Oi! Go get the sergeant major some water, cloth, unger, and food!
Chicks exhaled into her hand as she dragged it down her dirty face, draining the ale in one go before setting the mug back down onto the table. Everyone else cloistered around her, only parting for the kitchen staff.
How bad was it?
Zarin asked, crossing her arms as she took in the state of the human. She smelled of old magic diffusions, health potions, blood, and char.
You lot were fighting all the way up until this morning. We could hear the gunfire out in the snowfields right up until the sun broke over.
Chicks took a moment to wash her face with the warm, wet rag, then plopped it down onto the table, reaching over to take the hot mug of tea.
They've been crawling through the forest all night. Some of them may have gotten magicked in, but they sure as hell didn't get magicked out. From what our scouts have found, they are running clear back west towards Orc country, burning fuel and rubber the entire way.
How close did they get to breaking through? We heard that the point in the line nearly collapsed and only stayed in your hands because Yule was there.
Pearlie asked, leaning against one of the spare chairs. Chicks took a sip from her tea, then held it in her now only partially filthy hands.
They got close enough to cause worry. The Fae tried to do that trick they did at Tallwheat, but something must have gone wrong. Some of the enemy troops arrived only partially. We found a few bodies just missing entire parts of themselves, while others appeared to have arrived missing entire organs.
Teleportation spells can do that.
Lou Tyr said, folding his arms as he tilted down his sunglasses to look at Chicks.
If the spell is rushed and not properly done, things can be left behind from where the spell is cast. If we go poking around the woods, we're likely to find a pile of organs and missing body pieces.
Chicks shrugged.
Helped us out in the end. There were a lot of combat Fae there, Dracanics, and even a few of the black-haired ones.
The Elir.
Lou Tyr replied, holding up a finger.
If a Fae has black hair that steals the light, they're the tippy top of that ladder.
Regardless.
Chicks said with a sigh, taking another sip from her mug and smacking her lips.
We killed a good fair of them. The human volunteers proved their worth, as did our own Fae allies.
Pearlie held up a hand.
What about the prisoners then?
A lot of the locals flipped as soon as the battle was over. Poor bastards. They were brought in from Alberdond and will likely grease us with information. We took a few humans as well.
Chik said, going to continue before Hackholm raised her voice.
We heard you kill a few prisoners. Is that right?
Hackholm said, her face set and serious.
Why do you go about killing your own after they surrender? Someone said they saw the one named Decimus behead another human.
Uli cut his eyes to Hackholm, who flicked her eyes back to him, and they both regarded each other as Chik set down her mug.
Yes, we had to cull a few of them.
Chik said matter-of-factly, as if it didn't bother her in the slightest. Truth be told, it didn't. Nor was she sad when that man's head rolled off of his shoulders and thunked into the snow.
When we remove the collars, they become crazed. A few of them have already died due to their hearts shutting off. Their will too weak to fight against the Fey magic. Fewer still can take off the collar and shake the magic from themselves like a dog does water. We are only able to take them off in the first place due to a pair of gloves enchanted by Romella. Allows us to handle the collars as if we ourselves are Fey.
Hackholm held out her hands.
But why remove the man's head? Because when we took off the collar, he didn't change at all.
Chik said, fixing Hackholm with a long stare.
When we took off that collar, he kept spitting venom and lunged to attack us. He was a dyed in the wool supporter wearing that collar for its magical benefits. He was no slave.
The front door opened and more humans filed in, nursing wounds or looking so bone-tired that they could have fallen asleep in the wooden chairs around the tables.
No sign of him.
Dusty said, leaning his rifle against a table.
We looked all through these woods. There's no sign of McKnight.
Henry chuffed out a laugh, half his head bandaged from shrapnel wounds.
Don't know what you were expecting to find in the first place. Only thing out there are the bodies of the dead at this point. I doubt he's signing autographs.
Rusty said with a pained exhale, setting himself down into a chair as he cradled his stricken arm. While fighting in the trench, a grenade had landed too close, and in order to save the auxiliaries around him, he had picked up the grenade and shoved his arm into a pile of sandbags, saving the squad around him at the cost of his arm. Now he had a neatly healed stump halfway up his forearm, and it itched terribly.
We came away mauled and bloodied, but we won the day.
Rusty finished, already thinking in his head of how to convince the dwarves to make him a prosthetic. Alphonse stepped into the inn next, tired and ragged in the face, but still had enough energy to smile at Chicks.
Sleds have finally arrived back with Willie's team. They are all beat to shit, and there are a lot of dead with them.
Anyone we know?
Chicks asked him, trying not to fall asleep while she sat there. Alphonse pulled off his filthy coat, setting it across the back of a chair.
Buckwheat's hand is all mangled, and Bubba is barely alive after taking 3 revolver rounds to the chest. Violet got pretty fucked up and is likely going to have a permanent limp. Roxanne fucked up her hands punching a guy to death and took a few bullet holes. To be frank, Gabriel, Alaska, Fritz, and Willie are in much the same way. No one got out unscathed. A lot of the bowmen are dead, but a few survived. The one called Helena nearly died on the way here, but Violet kept giving her mouth-to-mouth and chest compressions. Kept her alive long enough for a healer to get their hands on her.
What about the staglings?
Zarin asked, remembering that a few of the race were pulling the sleds.
Did any of them go down in the fighting? If they did, Roach is gonna want to know about it so they can start the burial rituals.
Alphonse gave a happy chuckle.
They're the stars of the show right now. Pulled the sleds all the way here at max speed, all without stopping. They ran until they collapsed in front of the healers, skidding across the ice and snow with heaving chests.
Yule will probably give them an award.
Chicks murmured, and the humans around her snorted in tired laughter. Huff took a long pull from an offered tankard and exhaled roughly, foam stuck to his mustache. Yeah, sure. If he survives saving that damn knoll. And that is the end of chapter 9. If you like this story and others like them, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel of Garbro's Field Desk. You know, join the Discord, join the coffee, become a member. get sneak peeks at the art and the chapters and get little like tidbits I do through the making of the chapters. It's just the memberships and the donations do more than YouTube can ever do, because YouTube just what's the word I'm looking for? Fucking sucks. The most important of our members are the first shirts. These guys give $50 per week and keep this channel fucking rolling. That is E Machino, Cody Jero, Death's Dancer, and Insane Medic. Next are the E4 Mafia, bringing up the middle with $25 pledge per month. That's the Great Baguette, Sonic Arrow, Splug the Goblin, Darkside, Kiwi Bastard, Lacune 8, Josh Beatty, Matty Boy, and Crusader 0625. And then there's Snuffy Squad, rounding out this army sandwich. That's Super Stink 64, Elderock, Crowmin, Karina Kestrel, Dalek, Jules, Blonde Lore Lord, Thrace Vega, Devon, Sean Holtz, Andrew and Gil, Yeti Potato, Skelters, Kite Zero, Classic Cthulhu, Ranger Uninspired, Diesel Dog, Coffee Commander, Anto, Inquisitor Matt, Duncan D, and Ein, the Lore Smith. And Stuffy Squad gives $5 per month. And until we see you next time on this side of the veil, that was Fire, that was Rue, that was Technoward, that was Simba, that was Hailey, that was Vynn, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.